I am Diana, 32 years old, and after saving every penny for 8 years, I finally bought my dream home in the Chicago suburbs. My parents always said they were proud of my independence, while my younger brother Jake seemed to float through life on their generosity. Last Sunday, our family dinner took an unexpected turn when Jake announced he was moving into my house. The smile on my face never wavered as I dropped my bombshell. Before I dive into how I turned the tables on my entitled brother, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Give this video a like if you have ever had to stand up to family who took you for granted. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our middle-class family seemed picture perfect from the outside. My parents worked hard to give us a comfortable life. Dad was an accountant at a respectable firm, and Mom taught second grade at the local elementary school. We never went without necessities, but luxuries were earned through chores and good grades. At least that was the rule for me. Jake, my brother, who is 3 years younger than me, somehow operated under a different set of family rules. When we were kids, I had to save my allowance for weeks to buy the things I wanted, while Jake would throw a tantrum in a store and walk out with a new toy. My parents claimed he was sensitive and needed extra support. This pattern continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. I still remember the summer before college when I worked 2 jobs to save for textbooks. Meanwhile, Jake spent his days playing video games and hanging out with friends. When September rolled around, my parents helped me move into my dorm, but made it clear that my education was primarily my responsibility. They contributed what they could, but I took out loans and worked part-time throughout my 4 years to make ends meet. Jake, on the other hand, received a free ride to the same university 2 years later. He failed out after 3 semesters, having spent more time partying than studying. Instead of facing consequences, my parents paid for him to attend community college, which he also dropped out of after a year. This began a pattern that would continue well into our adult lives. After graduating with my business degree, I worked my way up in a real estate firm, starting as an assistant and eventually becoming a full agent. The housing market in Chicago was competitive, but I built a reputation for honesty and hard work. Every commission check went partly into savings for my own home someday. Jake bounced between jobs like they were dating prospects. He tried bartending but got fired for giving free drinks to friends. He worked at a cell phone store until inventory discrepancies led to his dismissal. He even attempted to sell insurance but could not be bothered to study for the licensing exam. Each failure came with a ready excuse: bad management, toxic workplace, or just plain bad luck. Never once did he acknowledge his own role in these situations. Through all this, my parents continued to support him financially. They paid his rent when he came up short, which was most months. They bought him a car when his old one died, claiming he needed reliable transportation to find a good job. They even paid off his credit card debt twice, lecturing him about responsibility while simultaneously removing the consequences of his irresponsibility. When I turned 29, after 7 years of dedicated saving and career building, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest house. The market was hot, and properties were being snatched up within days of listing. My real estate background gave me an advantage, and when a charming 3-bedroom craftsman-style home came on the market in a good neighborhood, I pounced. The asking price was at the very top of my budget, but I fell in love with the built-in bookshelves, original hardwood floors, and the bay window in the living room that let in the perfect amount of morning light. Securing the mortgage was stressful. As a single woman, the bank scrutinized my finances more than I expected. Every dollar I had ever earned seemed to be questioned and verified twice. The day I signed the final papers and received the keys, I cried in my car for a full 10 minutes. This house represented every sacrifice I had made, every extra shift I had worked, every vacation I had skipped to save money. It was more than a building. It was physical proof that my hard work meant something. My parents attended my housewarming party and seemed genuinely proud. Dad grilled in the backyard while Mom helped me arrange furniture. They gave me a gift card to a home improvement store as a present. It was one of the few times I felt like my achievements were being celebrated as much as Jake's mediocrity was usually accommodated. Jake came to the party 3 hours late, brought no gift, and spent most of the time complaining about his latest girlfriend troubles to anyone who would listen. When he finally acknowledged my new home, it was to ask if I would let him host a party there sometime since his apartment was too small. I politely declined, which led to a week of sulky text messages about how I had changed and become stuck up since buying my house. The next 2 years were blissful. I painted every room, planted a garden, and slowly furnished the place with pieces I loved, rather than the hand-me-downs and discount store items that had filled my apartments. The mortgage payments were steep, and unexpected repairs sometimes strained my budget, but I managed. Having my own space, my own sanctuary, was worth every penny. Meanwhile, Jake continued his pattern of instability. He moved in with a girlfriend, then back to his apartment when they broke up 3 months later. He quit another job because his boss did not respect his creative vision for the marketing team. He borrowed money from our parents for a car repair, then used it to go to a music festival. Every family gathering featured a new Jake drama, with my parents wringing their hands, but never actually requiring him to change. Last month, Jake lost his most recent job as an assistant manager at a sporting goods store. Something about inventory discrepancies. Again, though, his version involved a conspiracy of coworkers who were jealous of his potential. The same week, his landlord informed him that his lease would not be renewed due to multiple noise complaints and late payments. At 30 years old, my brother was once again facing unemployment and potential homelessness. I heard about these developments secondhand from my mother, who called to lament how unfair the world was to her baby boy. The conversation ended with a strange comment about how family needs to stick together through hard times and how your generation needs to support each other more. I thought nothing of it at the time, attributing it to my mother's tendency toward platitudes when she was upset. If I had been paying closer attention, I might have noticed the signs earlier, but I was distracted by my own life and challenges, unaware that my family was making plans that would directly impact me without any consideration for my input or consent. The first sign that something unusual was brewing came in the form of 3 separate phone calls from my parents in a single week. My mother and father typically called on Sunday afternoons for our weekly catch-up, so this sudden increase in communication raised a small red flag. Each call referenced vague family matters that needed discussion, but whenever I asked for specifics, they deflected with comments like, "Better to talk in person," and "Just some ideas we want to run by you." More concerning were the strange texts from Jake. After months of minimal contact, he suddenly wanted to know about my internet service provider and speed. "Just curious about what you pay for Wi-Fi," he wrote, followed by questions about which bedroom had the best natural light and whether the neighbors would mind if someone played music at night. When I asked why he needed this information, he responded with a vague "no reason" and a smiley face emoji. My suspicions grew when Jake texted me asking for the dimensions of my spare bedroom. Just wondering how big it is, like would a king-size bed fit in there? The room in question was my home office, where I often worked on evenings and weekends. It had never contained a bed of any size, and I had no plans to change that arrangement. Still, I was busy with work and dismissed his odd questions as Jake being Jake. That week at work was particularly stressful. I had a high-maintenance client looking at luxury properties in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The commission would be substantial if I could close the deal, but the client changed her requirements daily, sending me scrambling to find new properties that met her ever-evolving criteria. My boss made it clear that keeping this client happy was a priority for the firm, putting additional pressure on me to perform. To compound matters, my house developed a serious plumbing issue. What started as a small leak under the kitchen sink quickly escalated into a major problem with the main water line. The plumber delivered the bad news with the sympathetic grimace of someone who knows they are ruining your day. Fixing the issue properly would cost over $7,000, money I did not have readily available. This financial blow came on the heels of replacing the water heater 2 months prior and dealing with electrical issues the month before that. The charming century-old craftsman-style home that had stolen my heart was revealing its true nature as a money pit. I had depleted my emergency fund and was now facing putting a large expense on my credit card, something I had sworn never to do after watching Jake spiral into debt with that same behavior. In a moment of pragmatism overriding emotion, I called my financial advisor to discuss options. Sandra had helped me budget for the home purchase initially and had gently suggested at the time that I might be stretching myself too thin. Now, reviewing my financial situation, she pointed out what I had been avoiding. Acknowledging that between the mortgage, the repairs, and my other expenses, I was slowly drowning. Have you considered selling? Sandra asked gently. The market is hot right now, especially in your neighborhood. You bought at a good time, and prices have risen. You could potentially walk away with enough to pay off your debts and have a healthy down payment for something more manageable. The thought of selling my dream home felt like failure at first. This house represented everything I had worked for. But as Sandra walked me through the numbers, I realized she was right. Continuing on this path would eventually lead to financial disaster. Being house poor was affecting every other aspect of my life, from my stress levels to my ability to save for retirement. That evening, I contacted a colleague who specialized in residential sales in my area. Melissa came over the next day, walking through my house with the clinical eye of a professional rather than the emotional attachment of an owner. She confirmed what Sandra had suggested. I could list the house significantly above what I had paid for it 2 years ago and likely get multiple offers. Would you be comfortable with a quick sale if the right offer came along? Melissa asked. I have a couple who just lost out on a bidding war for a similar property one neighborhood over. They are motivated buyers with financing already in place. The universe, it seemed, was sending me a clear message. The next day, the couple Melissa mentioned toured my house while I was at work. By that evening, they had submitted an offer 5% above my asking price with a single condition. They needed to close quickly, within 30 days. In return, they were willing to let me rent back the property for an additional 30 days after closing, while I found a new place at a nominal fee. The decision was both heart-wrenching and obviously correct. I accepted the offer and signed the preliminary paperwork the following day. The inspection was scheduled for early the next week, leaving me with a strange emotional limo over the weekend. I would be attending my family's traditional Sunday dinner with this massive life change underway. Yet, I decided not to mention it yet. The sale could still fall through, and more importantly, I wanted to process my own feelings before dealing with my family's reactions. The inspection went smoothly with only minor issues noted that I agreed to address before closing. By Wednesday, all contingencies had been removed and the sale was moving forward. The closing was set for the following Thursday, just one day before the next family dinner. I would walk into Sunday's meal with the deed transfer complete and a certified check representing my equity in hand. As I prepared for the dinner, a complex mixture of emotions swirled within me. Relief about my financial situation being resolved competed with sadness about losing the home I had loved. Pride in making a mature, responsible decision vied with disappointment that my dream had proven unsustainable. And underlying it all was a growing unease about Jake's strange questions and my parents' insistent calls about family matters to discuss. I chose not to tell them about selling my house until after the closing was complete, partly to avoid jinxing the deal, but mostly because I wanted to make this decision entirely on my own without family input or drama. For once, this was about me and my needs, not about accommodating others or seeking approval. I had no idea that my decision would collide so dramatically with my family's secret plans, or that Sunday's dinner would become a turning point in all our relationships. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had been a tradition since Jake and I were in high school. Even after moving out, we maintained the ritual with rare exceptions. Mom always prepared a roast or lasagna or some other comfort food that required hours in the kitchen, and Dad would open a bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion. These gatherings normally had a comfortable predictability to them, a rhythm established over decades of family meals. This particular Sunday, I arrived at exactly 5:00, the designated dinner time. The familiar scent of pot roast and garlic mashed potatoes greeted me as I walked through the front door. Mom had set the dining room table with the good china, which was unusual for our casual family dinners. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket on the sideboard, another departure from our typical wine with dinner routine. There she is, my father called from his recliner in the living room, muting the pregame show he had been watching. He stood to hug me, patting my back with unusual enthusiasm. Right on time as always, our reliable Diana. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sweetheart, you look tired. Work keeping you busy?" She embraced me, then held me at arm's length to examine my face. "Those dark circles under your eyes. You are working too hard, honey." "Just a demanding client and some house issues," I replied, deliberately vague. "Something smells amazing, though. Can I help with anything?" No. Everything is under control. Jake should be here any minute." She exchanged a meaningful glance with my father that I pretended not to notice. "Why don't you sit down and relax? Your father opened some wine already." I accepted a glass of Cabernet and took my usual seat on the sofa, making small talk about the unseasonably warm weather and my mother's container garden on the back patio. The conversation felt forced, with my parents repeatedly checking the time in the front window for signs of Jake's arrival. At 20 minutes past 5, the front door swung open and Jake strolled in as if his tardiness was of no consequence. "Sorry I'm late," he announced without sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was brutal." Considering he lived only 15 minutes away and rarely apologized for anything, this nominal acknowledgement of his lateness struck me as oddly formal. What truly caught my attention, however, was his appearance. Jake had gotten a haircut, exchanging his usual shaggy style for something more professional. He wore a button-down shirt tucked into khaki pants instead of his typical t-shirt and jeans. Most surprisingly, he carried a gift bag and what appeared to be a bottle of wine wrapped in tissue paper. "Jake, you look nice," Mom gushed, accepting his offering. "And you brought wine. How thoughtful." "Just wanted to contribute to the celebration," he replied, with a wink that sent a chill down my spine. Whatever was happening here had been orchestrated in advance, and I was the only one not in on the plan. When we moved to the dining room table, the unusual dynamics continued. My mother had placed Jake at the head of the table, a position typically occupied by my father. Dad took the foot of the table, leaving Mom and me on either side. As we served ourselves pot roast, potatoes, and green beans, the conversation remained stilted and artificial. "So, Diana," my mother began after a few minutes of eating in awkward silence, "that big, beautiful house of yours must feel awfully empty with just you in it. All that extra space going to waste." I chewed slowly, buying time before responding. "It's just the right size for me. Actually, I use the spare bedroom as my home office, and the third bedroom is perfect for storage and guests." "But surely you get lonely," she persisted. "Such a big place for one person." My father jumped in before I could respond. "Family should stick together during tough times. That's what I always say. We need to support each other, especially now with the economy being what it is." Jake nodded sagely, as if our father had just dispensed profound wisdom rather than a transparent lead into whatever announcement was coming. "Absolutely. Family first, right now." The meal continued in this vein, with pointed comments about my house, the importance of family, and thinly veiled references to Jake's recent string of bad luck. I noticed Jake checking his phone repeatedly, seemingly waiting for a specific time. My parents kept exchanging glances laden with anticipation. The champagne in the ice bucket remained unopened, clearly waiting for the main event. As Mom served her homemade apple pie for dessert, Jake cleared his throat and stood up, reaching for the champagne. "I think it's time we let Diana in on the good news," he announced, beginning to unwrap the foil from the bottle. "What good news?" I asked, though a sinking feeling in my stomach told me I already knew. The cork popped, with a festive sound that felt jarringly out of place, given the tension I was feeling. Jake poured champagne into 4 flutes that my mother had apparently set out in preparation for this moment. "Well, as you know, I've had some setbacks recently," Jake began, his tone suggesting he was about to announce a hard-won accomplishment rather than another handout. "My landlord is being completely unreasonable about the lease, and the job market is brutal right now for someone with my qualifications." I took a small sip of champagne, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "But every cloud has a silver lining," he continued, raising his glass. "Mom and Dad and I have been talking, and we've come up with the perfect solution, a real win-win scenario." He paused dramatically, clearly savoring his moment in the spotlight. "2 new living arrangements," Jake announced, lifting his glass higher. "Starting next Saturday, I'm moving into Diana's house, just until I get back on my feet, of course." The silence that followed his proclamation lasted only a few seconds, but it felt eternal. My parents were beaming at Jake, then turned expectant smiles toward me, waiting for my enthusiastic endorsement of their plan. Jake's expression was a mixture of entitlement and smug satisfaction, as if he had cleverly solved a problem. "Mom and Dad said the spare bedroom would be perfect for me," Jake added when I didn't immediately respond. "They figured since you're never home anyway because of work, you wouldn't even notice me there. Plus, I can help with utilities and maybe mow the lawn sometimes." My mother nodded encouragingly. "We thought it was the perfect solution, honey. Jake needs a stable place to live while he job hunts, and you have all that extra space. Family helping family. And this way you wouldn't be all alone in that big house." My father added, "It's not safe for a young woman to live alone these days anyway." I looked around the table at their expectant faces, these people who had made plans to insert Jake into my home without even consulting me. They had discussed my living arrangements, decided what was best for me, and now expected me to gratefully accept their decision. The audacity was breathtaking. In that moment, a strange calm settled over me. The anxiety I had felt about telling them I had sold the house evaporated, replaced by a clear certainty that I was making the right decision for myself. "That's an interesting plan," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "There's just one small problem with it." "What's that, honey?" my mother asked, her smile faltering slightly. I reached for my purse hanging on the back of my chair and removed the manila envelope containing the closing documents I had signed just the day before. "I sold my house last week. The new owners take possession in 30 days. The silence that followed my announcement was profound. 3 pairs of eyes stared at me in varying states of disbelief. My mother's hand flew to her throat in a gesture of shock I had previously only seen in daytime soap operas. My father's bushy eyebrows drew together in confusion. Jake's mouth literally hung open, his champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. "You're joking, right?" Jake finally broke the silence, a nervous laugh escaping him. "This is some kind of weird payback prank." I removed the deed transfer and closing documents from the envelope and placed them on the table. The inspection was completed on Tuesday. All contingencies were removed Wednesday, and we closed yesterday afternoon. The new owners are a lovely couple with a 5-year-old daughter who is very excited about the backyard swing set I'm leaving for her. My father picked up the papers, adjusting his reading glasses to examine them. His expression darkened as he realized I was telling the truth. "Diana, why would you do something like this without discussing it with your family first? This is a major life decision." The irony of his statement was not lost on me. "You mean the way you all discussed Jake moving into my house before informing me?" "That's completely different," my mother interjected. "We were trying to help both of you." "By volunteering my home as a landing pad for Jake without asking me? How is that helping me exactly?" The calm I had felt moments ago was beginning to crack. Years of resentment seeping through the fissures. Jake snatched the papers from my father and scanned them frantically, as if looking for a loophole. "You did this on purpose," he accused, slapping the documents down on the table. "You heard somehow that I needed a place to stay, and you sold your house to spite me." "Not everything is about you, Jake," I replied, keeping my voice level with effort. "I sold my house because it was becoming a financial burden. The plumbing issues alone were going to cost $7,000 to fix properly. Money I don't have, because unlike you, I don't have parents who bail me out of every financial crisis." "That's unfair, Diana," my father said sternly. "We have always supported both our children equally." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could suppress it. "Equally, Dad? I worked 2 jobs to pay for college while you gave Jake a free ride, which he wasted. I saved for 8 years to buy that house while you paid Jake's rent whenever he came up short. You bought him a car when his died, but when my transmission went out last year, all I got was advice to take the bus until I could afford repairs." "Your brother has had a harder time finding his path," my mother defended, tears welling in her eyes. "He needs more support." "And whose fault is that?" I challenged. "You've been supporting his bad decisions for so long that he's never had to face consequences or grow up." Jake pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "I don't have to listen to this sanctimonious bullcrap. You've always thought you were better than me, Diana. Miss Perfect with her real estate career and her house in the nice neighborhood. I don't think I'm better than you," I said quietly. "I just made different choices and worked hard for what I have. What I had," I corrected myself, the reality of selling my beloved home hitting me again. "Well, your choices have screwed me over," Jake spat. "I already gave notice at my apartment. I have to be out by the end of the month, and now I have nowhere to go." My mother gasped. "Jake, you already gave notice? We said to wait until after we talked to Diana." Jake had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I was being proactive. Mom, the landlord was hassling me about the noise complaints, and I figured why pay rent for another month when I could move in with Di." "You assumed I would just welcome you with open arms?" I cut in, the full extent of his entitlement dawning on me. "You made a life decision based on access to my house, which you never bothered to ask me about." "Because you would have said no," Jake shouted. "You've always been selfish." "Enough!" My father rarely raised his voice, so his sharp command silenced the room. "This is getting us nowhere. Diana, is there any way you can back out of this sale? If you explain the situation, maybe the buyers would understand." I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you seriously asking me to cancel a legal contract? potentially get sued, and definitely lose the earnest money so Jake can have a free place to crash after I just told you I needed to sell for financial reasons? We could help with the plumbing costs, my mother offered quickly, and maybe chip in for utilities while Jake stays with you. The sale is final, I said firmly, and even if it wasn't, I wouldn't cancel it for this reason. Jake is 30 years old. He needs to solve his own housing crisis. Jake pushed his chair back further and stood. Thanks for the support, sis. Really feeling the family love right now. He stormed toward the front door. Jake, wait, my mother called, rising to follow him. Let him go, Mom, I said wearily. He needs to cool down. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the china cabinet. My mother sank back into her chair, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. How could you do this to your brother? He's going to be homeless. He's not going to be homeless, I countered. He has options. He could find a roommate situation, rent a studio apartment, or even stay with you and Dad temporarily while he finds a place. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably at this last suggestion. Well, we would offer, of course, but your mother just converted Jake's old room into her crafting space, and all the furniture has been donated. You still have the guest room, I pointed out. That's more of a storage space now, my mother said quickly. Besides, Jake needs his independence. Just not enough independence to find his own housing solution, I observed dryly. My father sighed heavily. Diana, try to understand. We're just trying to help Jake get on his feet. You've always been so capable, so self-sufficient. Jake struggles in ways you never did. Because you never gave him the chance to develop those skills, I replied. Every time he faces a consequence for his actions, you swoop in and fix it for him. How is he ever supposed to learn? We're his parents, my mother said defensively. That's what parents do. No, Mom, that's what enablers do, I said gently. Real parental love means preparing your children for the real world, not shielding them from it forever. The conversation continued in circles, with my parents alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and suggestions for how I could still accommodate Jake despite selling my house. Could I let him stay with me in my new place? Could I help pay for his apartment until he found a job? Would I consider lending him money from the proceeds of my home sale? Each suggestion made it clearer that, in their eyes, my resources would always be viewed as a potential safety net for Jake. The money from my house sale was not seen as my financial security, but as a family fund that should be available to solve Jake's problems. After an hour of this exhausting conversation, I gathered my purse and the closing documents. I need to go. I have an early showing tomorrow, and I need to continue packing tonight. Diana, please, my mother began, but I cut her off with a raised hand. I love you both, but I cannot keep having the same conversation. Jake is an adult, and his housing situation is not my responsibility. I hope you'll help him find a realistic solution, but I need to focus on my own transition right now. My father walked me to the door in silence, his expression troubled. As I turned to say goodbye, he surprised me by pulling me into a tight hug. I'm proud of you, he whispered, even when I don't understand your decisions. It was a small acknowledgement, but in that moment, it meant everything. With tears threatening, I hurried to my car and drove home to my soon-to-be former house, the weight of the evening heavy on my shoulders. The days following the disastrous family dinner were filled with a barrage of texts, calls, and even unexpected visits from various family members. My phone became a battlefield of emotions, with messages ranging from guilt-inducing to outright hostile. Jake predictably led the charge with a series of angry texts that evolved from, I can't believe you would do this to me, to detailed explanations of how I had apparently ruined his life. According to him, his entire future had been planned around moving into my house, despite this plan having been conceived without my knowledge or consent. I already told everyone I was moving to your neighborhood, one particularly entitled message read. Now I look like an idiot because my own sister would rather sell her house than help me out. I resisted the urge to respond with sarcasm and instead kept my replies brief and factual. I sold my house for financial reasons. Your living situation is separate from my decision. My parents employed a different tactic. Rather than Jake's direct anger, they attempted to negotiate as if we were discussing a business arrangement rather than a fundamental boundary issue. Your father and I have been talking, my mother said during one of her daily calls. What if we help with the down payment on your new place? Something with an extra bedroom for Jake, just for 6 months until he finds his feet. Mom, that's not the solution, I explained for what felt like the 100th time. I'm downsizing intentionally to reduce my financial stress. Adding Jake to my living situation would add more stress, not less. Even extended family members began to weigh in. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, called to express her disappointment in my lack of family values. My cousin Patrick sent a lengthy email explaining how his brother had lived with him for a year during a rough patch and how it had strengthened their bond. Neither acknowledged the fundamental difference. Those arrangements had been mutual agreements, not unilateral declarations. Throughout this familial pressure campaign, I continued the practical work of preparing for my move. The buyers had agreed to let me rent back the house for 30 days after closing, giving me a month to find a new place and relocate. The certified check from the sale sat in a newly opened high-yield savings account, providing a financial cushion I had never experienced before. Working with a different colleague from my real estate firm, I began viewing apartments and small condos in more affordable neighborhoods. After years of stretching myself thin to maintain the dream house, I found the prospect of a simpler living situation surprisingly appealing. A small modern condo with no maintenance responsibilities and significantly lower monthly costs represented a different kind of freedom. One afternoon, while signing the lease on a charming one-bedroom apartment in a converted warehouse building, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "We need to talk. Coming over after work." I considered telling him not to come, but decided it might be better to have this conversation face-to-face rather than through more heated text exchanges. When I arrived home from the leasing office, Jake's car was already parked in my driveway, and he sat on the front steps waiting. "Nice of you to let me know you were coming," I said, unlocking the front door and gesturing for him to follow me inside. The living room was already half-packed, with labeled boxes stacked against the walls, and the artwork removed, leaving ghostly rectangles on the painted surfaces. Jake looked around with a frown, the reality of my move apparently hitting him for the first time. "So you're really going through with this?" he said, not as a question, but as an accusation. "The house is already sold, Jake. The new owners take possession in 24 days? I set my purse down and crossed my arms. "What did you want to talk about?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of our father when he was stressed. "Mom and Dad said I should apologize for how I acted at dinner. So, sorry about that, I guess." The half-hearted apology hung in the air between us. "Is that all you came to say?" "No," he admitted, dropping onto the sofa without invitation. "I came to see if we could work something out. I'm in a real bind here, Di. My landlord is being a complete jerk about the noise complaints, which were totally exaggerated, by the way. He's not renewing my lease no matter what, and I have to be out by the end of the month." "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change my situation," I replied, remaining standing. "The house is sold. I'm moving to a one-bedroom apartment that barely fits my own furniture, let alone a roommate." "What about a loan then?" Jake asked, leaning forward. "Just enough for first and last month's rent and security deposit on a new place. I'll pay you back as soon as I find a new job." The familiar pattern threatened to repeat itself. Jake in trouble, family expected to rescue him, promises of repayment that would never materialize. For a moment I considered it. The money from the house sale meant I could afford to help him without significant hardship to myself. But then I remembered every previous loan that had become a gift, every promise to do better that had evaporated as soon as the crisis passed. "No, Jake, I'm not going to loan you money," I said firmly. "You've had plenty of chances to build emergency savings, but you choose to spend everything you earn immediately." "Must be nice to be so perfect," he sneered, the thin veneer of contrition vanishing. "Some of us have had bad luck." "This isn't about luck," I said, my patience wearing thin. "This is about choices and consequences. You chose to violate your lease terms repeatedly. You chose to spend money on concerts and trips instead of saving for emergencies. Now you're facing the consequences of those choices." "So you're just going to let me be homeless?" Jake stood up, his voice rising. "Your own brother?" "You have options that don't involve me," I pointed out. "You could ask one of your friends for a couch to crash on. You could look for a room to rent in a shared house, which would be much cheaper than getting your own place. You could even swallow your pride and stay with Mom and Dad temporarily." "None of those are real options," Jake insisted. "My friends all have small places, roommate situations are for college kids, and Mom and Dad's house is in the middle of nowhere with no social life." I couldn't help but laugh at his definition of nowhere, since our parents lived in the same suburban neighborhood where we had grown up, just 30 minutes from downtown Chicago. "Those all sound like real options to me," I said. "They're just not as comfortable or convenient as moving into my house would have been. That's the difference here, Jake. You don't want any solution that requires sacrifice or discomfort on your part." "You've changed," he accused, grabbing his jacket from the sofa. "Ever since you bought this place, you've been different, like you think you're better than the rest of us." "I haven't changed," I said quietly. "I've just stopped apologizing for having boundaries and expectations. Maybe it's time you changed, Jake. Maybe losing your apartment and job is the wake-up call you need." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," he spat, heading for the door. "Have fun in your tiny apartment while I figure out how to avoid living on the street." As the door slammed behind him, I sank onto the sofa and closed my eyes. The confrontation had been unpleasant but necessary. For perhaps the first time, I had refused to be drawn into the drama that always surrounded Jake like a storm cloud. I had maintained my boundaries despite the emotional manipulation. It felt both terrible and liberating, like lancing a wound that had been festering for years. The immediate pain was intense, but I could already sense that healing would follow. As I looked around at the half-packed boxes and the home I was leaving behind, I realized I was not just moving physical locations, but moving forward in my life. The next morning, I woke to a text from my father. "Your mother and I have been talking. Jake will stay in the guest room until he finds a place. We would appreciate if you could help us clear out some of the storage to make space for him." It was a small victory, but a significant one. For the first time, my parents were stepping up to help Jake in a way that did not involve imposing on me or enabling his worst habits. Maybe they were finally beginning to understand the difference between supporting and enabling. As I continued packing and preparing for my move, I made a difficult but necessary decision. I needed a break from family drama to focus on establishing my new life. I sent a group text to my parents and Jake explaining that I would be taking some time for myself over the next few weeks. I would be available for emergencies, but needed space to deal with my move and adjust to my new living situation. The responses were predictably varied. My mother expressed hurt and confusion. My father sent a simple, "We understand. Take the time you need." Jake did not respond at all. It was not a permanent solution, but it was a start, a chance to reset the dysfunctional patterns that had defined our family relationships for too long. As I sealed up another box of belongings, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the bittersweet reality of leaving my dream home behind. Moving day arrived with the peculiar mix of exhaustion and excitement that accompanies major life transitions. The moving company I had hired arrived promptly at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the systematic dismantling of my life in the dream house began in earnest. Each piece of furniture carried out the door represented a memory, an investment, a piece of the life I had built for myself. The bay window where I had spent countless Sunday mornings reading with coffee in hand, the dining room table where I had hosted dinner parties for friends and colleagues, the antique desk in my home office where I had worked late into the night on complicated real estate deals, all loaded into a truck destined for a space less than half the size of the one I was leaving. As the movers worked, I wandered through the increasingly empty rooms, saying a private goodbye to the house that had represented so much to me. In the master bedroom, I ran my hand along the wall I had painted 3 times before finding the perfect shade of blue. In the kitchen, I remembered the disastrous attempt at making homemade pasta that had left flour on every surface. Each room held memories, some joyful, some painful, all part of the life I was now consciously choosing to leave behind. When the last box was loaded, I did a final walkthrough with the new owners. The young couple was visibly excited, already discussing where their daughter's toys would go and which room would become their home office. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself sharing in their joy. Even as I handed over the keys, my house would become their home, and there was something beautiful about that continuation. The first few weeks in my new apartment were an adjustment. The space was modern and low maintenance, with concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and large industrial windows that flooded the open-concept living area with natural light. It was stylish in a way my old house had never been, but it took time to adapt to the smaller footprint and the sounds of city living outside my windows. What surprised me most was the financial relief I felt almost immediately. After paying off the remaining mortgage and setting aside money for taxes, I had enough left to clear all my outstanding debts and establish a healthy emergency fund. My monthly expenses dropped dramatically without the burden of the mortgage and constant home repairs. For the first time in years, I could look at my bank account without a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. Meanwhile, across town, my family was undergoing their own adjustment period. True to their word, my parents had cleared enough space in their guest room to accommodate Jake temporarily. According to the occasional updates from my mother, the arrangement was not without challenges. "He stays out until all hours," she complained during one of our brief phone conversations, "and he leaves his dishes in the sink, even though I've asked him a dozen times to rinse them." I listened sympathetically, but resisted the urge to say, "I told you so." This was a lesson my parents needed to learn for themselves. The real surprise came about a month after my move when my father called with unexpected news. "Your brother has a job interview tomorrow," he announced with cautious optimism. "An actual professional position with that marketing firm downtown. He asked me to help him prepare for it." "That's great," I replied, genuinely pleased. "What changed?" "Well," my father said with a chuckle, "your mother implemented some house rules: rent due on the first of the month, chores assigned weekly, and a curfew for weeknights. Jake pitched a fit at first, but when she stood firm and I backed her up, he realized we were serious." "Mom is charging him rent?" I could not keep the shock from my voice. "Not much," my father admitted. "Just enough to give him some responsibility. We're putting the money aside to help him with a security deposit when he finds his own place. But he doesn't know that part." It was a small step, but a significant one. For perhaps the first time, my parents were treating Jake like an adult, capable of meeting expectations, rather than a perpetual child in need of rescue. 2 weeks later, the family gathered for the first Sunday dinner since the confrontation. I arrived with some trepidation, unsure what reception to expect. To my surprise, the atmosphere was cordial, if somewhat strained. Jake, dressed in business casual attire I had rarely seen him wear, announced that he had gotten the marketing job and would be starting the following Monday. "It's entry level," he explained with unusual humility, "but there's room for advancement if I prove myself." "That's wonderful, Jake," I said sincerely. "The marketing background from your community college courses should help." He nodded, meeting my eyes briefly before looking away. It was not an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts, a recognition that things were changing between us. After dinner, while helping my mother clear the table, she pulled me into an unexpected hug. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Your father and I have been talking, and we realize now that we haven't been fair to either of you. We expected too little of Jake and too much of you." The acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." "It hasn't been easy having him back home," she continued with a rueful smile, "but it's been good for all of us. I think your father and I are learning to set boundaries we should have established years ago." Over the following months, a new family dynamic slowly emerged. Jake found an apartment within his budget in a neighborhood not far from his new job. It was small and far from luxurious, but it was his, earned through his own efforts. When he hosted a modest housewarming party, I brought a plant and a gift card to a nearby grocery store as my contribution. "Thanks for coming," he said awkwardly as I was leaving. "I know things have been weird between us." "Family is complicated," I replied with a smile, "but we're figuring it out." "For what it's worth," he added, hands shoved in his pockets, "I get it now. Why you were so protective of your house and your independence. I shouldn't have expected you to sacrifice what you worked for just because I made poor choices." It was not a grand apology, but from Jake, it was significant progress. "I appreciate that, and for what it's worth, I'm proud of what you're building for yourself." Now, as summer turned to fall, I found myself settling comfortably into my new life. The apartment had become home, decorated with my favorite pieces from the house, and a few new additions better suited to the urban industrial aesthetic. My financial situation had stabilized, allowing me to focus on building my career rather than just paying bills. With the proceeds from the house sale invested wisely, I began casually looking at properties again, but with a more realistic perspective. The dream home had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between what I wanted and what I needed, between status and security. When the time came to buy again, it would be with clear eyes and practical expectations. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family continued to evolve. My parents, seeing the positive changes in Jake's life, began to understand the damage their enabling had caused. They still supported both of us, but in healthier ways that acknowledged our adulthood and autonomy. Jake and I would never be best friends, but we were learning to interact with mutual respect rather than resentment and entitlement. One evening, as I sat by my apartment window watching the city lights come on, I received an unexpected text from Jake. "Got my first performance bonus today. Taking myself out to celebrate. Never thought I'd say this, but thanks for not letting me move in. Needed the kick in the pants." I smiled at the message, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The path to this moment had been painful for all of us, but perhaps necessary. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most important growth. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need. 6 months after selling my dream house, I stood in the living room of a modest two-bedroom townhouse in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. Sunlight streamed through windows that overlooked a small but private patio garden. The space was smaller than my former house, but more practical for my needs, with modern amenities that would not require constant repairs and updates. "What do you think?" asked my realtor, a colleague who had patiently shown me dozens of properties over the past few months. "I think this might be the one," I replied, already envisioning my furniture in the space. This time, my home purchase was driven by practicality rather than emotion. I had carefully calculated what I could comfortably afford without stretching my finances to the breaking point. The proceeds from selling my previous house had been partly invested and partly used for a substantial down payment that would keep my monthly mortgage manageable. The financial security that came from making smarter choices had transformed more than just my housing situation. Without the constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck, I found myself sleeping better, enjoying my work more, and having energy for hobbies and friendships that had been neglected during my house-poor years. The journey to this point had not been easy, particularly regarding my family relationships. The confrontation at that fateful dinner had initially created deep rifts, but over time, those painful conversations had led to unexpected healing. My brother Jake had surprised everyone, including himself, with his growth over the past 6 months. After the initial shock of having to solve his own housing crisis, he had found an affordable apartment, committed to his new marketing job, and even started building an emergency savings account. We were not close in the way some siblings are, but we had developed a mutual respect that had been absent for most of our adult lives. "Your brother asked me for financial advice last week," my father commented during a recent phone call, his tone conveying his astonishment. "Wanted to know about retirement accounts and investment options for his work bonus." I nearly fell out of my chair. My parents had undergone their own transformation. Having Jake live with them temporarily had been a wake-up call regarding the consequences of their enabling behavior. They had been forced to establish boundaries they should have set years earlier, and in doing so, had discovered that Jake was capable of far more independence than they had believed. "We did him no favors," my mother admitted during a heart-to-heart conversation over coffee. "We thought we were protecting him, but we were actually preventing him from growing up. It took your standing firm for us to see that." The most profound changes, however, had occurred within me. Selling my dream house had initially felt like failure, but with time and perspective, I recognized it as one of the wisest decisions I had ever made. I had learned to distinguish between the things that truly brought value to my life and the status symbols I had been conditioned to pursue. My new approach to finances reflected this shift in priorities. Rather than pouring every dollar into maintaining an impressive house, I now budgeted for experiences and relationships that brought genuine joy, weekend trips with friends, cooking classes I had always wanted to try, and even occasional family vacations that created memories more valuable than any physical possession. The family dynamics had improved dramatically once we all began to recognize and respect each other's boundaries. My parents no longer expected me to solve Jake's problems, and Jake no longer assumed he was entitled to my resources. We functioned as adults with separate lives who chose to support each other in healthy ways. Last month, Jake had even repaid a small loan I had reluctantly given him for car repairs, something that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The amount was less significant than the principal. He was taking responsibility for his obligations and honoring his commitments. As I signed the purchase agreement for my new townhouse, I reflected on the lessons learned through this challenging period. True family support means encouraging independence, not enabling dependence. By refusing to let Jake use my house as an escape from consequences, I had ultimately helped him far more than if I had given in to family pressure. Material possessions, even dream homes, are poor substitutes for financial security and peace of mind. The status of owning an impressive house had briefly satisfied my ego, but had created constant stress that diminished my quality of life. Setting and maintaining boundaries, though painful in the moment, creates healthier relationships in the long run. The temporary discomfort of confrontation had led to more authentic connections with my family. Sometimes losing what you think you want opens the door to what you truly need. Selling my dream house had felt like failure initially, but had ultimately created space for a more balanced and fulfilling life. After the closing, I sent a group text to my family. Just signed the papers on my new place. Smaller, smarter, and actually affordable. Housewarming party next month. Jake, I expect you to bring that spinach dip you made for Thanksgiving. My brother's response came almost immediately. Only if you promise not to sell this house the next time I need a favor. The joke, which would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, made me laugh out loud. We had all grown through this experience, painful as it had been. That evening, as I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset over the city skyline, I felt a sense of contentment that had eluded me even in my dream house. True security, I had learned, came not from impressive possessions, but from wise choices, healthy boundaries, and authentic relationships. The journey had been difficult, but the destination had proven worth every painful step. In losing my dream house, I had found something far more valuable. A dream life built on reality rather than appearances, on wisdom rather than wishful thinking. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that others did not understand, but that ultimately proved to be the right choice? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about setting boundaries and finding your own path. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with family expectations or financial pressure. Remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most important growth. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to make the right decisions for yourself even when they are difficult.